Welcome to Session 10 of the Alaska Autism Resource Center's Visual Strategies for Individuals with Autism Spectrum Disorder and Related Disabilities. This is the last session in our Visual Strategy series, and we are very happy that you decided to join us tonight. So before we get started, there are a list of materials that you're going to need to complete for this to be able to complete this project. You're going to need a printer, some cardstock or printer paper, scissors, a laminator or contact paper, clear packing tape, something to be able to protect the visual that you're making, some glue, printed handouts and templates that are available on our site, a lanyard or some type of necklace or string if you would like to be able to put your visual rules that you're making around your neck. And these lanyard is included if you ordered our free materials kit from our resource center. A lanyard is included in that, and a hole punch. So I'm going to give everybody a few minutes to be able to get the things together that they're going to need to be able, if you're missing anything that you need to go grab really quickly. But the same drill as always, if we could have you turn your camera and your microphone off on your computer. So these buttons right now are green, and if you could turn them to red, then that will prevent us from getting any little snapshots of your face or your room that you're in, and will prevent the video from breaking up and people not being able to hear it and being able to hear your audio instead. So if you could go ahead and turn those things off for us while everybody is gathering their materials. And also, we want to make sure that you signed in and you took your pre-test on the Moodle site. There is a place for you to sign in on our sign-in sheet, and also a place to be able to take your pre-test. If you could do that before we start, and then also print any of the templates that you might need to be able to complete this, and also your handouts of the PowerPoint. All of that is available on the site, and you can go ahead and print that before we get started. So I'm going to give you just a few minutes now to get all of those things together so that you'll be ready to begin with everything that you need. So today what we're going to talk about a little bit is we're going to talk about how do we know that a strategy is going to work. How do we know kind of which strategies to select? And so we're going to talk a lot today about evidence-based practice or scientifically based practices. In the field of autism, we now have evidence-based practices that we can follow in order to know which interventions have been shown to have been effective for individuals with autism, which ones are not effective, or which ones might even be harmful for individuals with autism. So there's been a lot of research done lately on trying to get a set of evidence-based practices that everyone in the field can use and can turn to whenever we're looking for what are some really good strategies to use with the people we're working with. And so up until this year, we had this is from an article that was put out in 2005. And so we had, as you can see, these 4 strategies were the only practices that we had that were listed as evidence-based practices for working with individuals with autism. And so that was ABA, or Applied Behavior Analysis, Discrete Trial Training, Pivotal Response Training, and LEAP, which is Learning Experiences, an alternative program for preschoolers and parents. And so those were the only strategies that had enough evidence behind them, enough research behind them, for us to say that these are established practices in the field of autism, and to say that these practices typically work with many individuals with autism and teaching specific skills. So that wasn't very many that we had. And then in 2009, the National Standards Project came out, and this was really exciting in the world of autism because, as you know, IDEA says that in the school system that we must use evidence-based practices to instruct our kids with autism. Well, any kids, but our kids with autism are included in that. So up until then, we didn't really have a really clear plan as to what we were going to use, because what are clear evidence-based practices to work with kids with autism. So in 2009, we got the National Standards Project. This was published, and we got lots of really good information, because the people in this project, they took tons and tons and tons of studies that had been done on practices in working with kids and children and adults with autism, and they looked at each one of those, and they compiled from reviewing the literature and looking at which ones had been successful, they set some real strict guidelines so they would be able to tell which ones, what the criteria was for saying that this was a successful strategy. And they came out with a really clear document that's ever growing, ever changing. We know that as more research is done and more strategies are going to be added, but it's a really good starting point for being able to determine which practices are established practices for working with individuals with autism. And so here's the criteria that they used, and I'm not going to read it to you, but you can go back and read the National Standards Project anytime. But what they found under established practices were that they broke it into different skill areas. So in academic, they found these are the strategies that they found were established practices in working with individuals with autism. So academic, communication, interpersonal skills, learning readiness, motor skills. So all of these things are broken out, and you can see that they have behavioral packages, antecedent packages, joint attention training, modeling, peer training, pivotal response training, cognitive behavioral therapy. So there are lots of different strategies that they have listed on there that, from the research that they looked at, have shown to be effective with individuals with autism. And then they looked at breaking it into kind of what you're trying to look at with behaviors. So if you're looking at problem behaviors, and then there's some strategies that have been proven to be effective. Then if you're looking at sensory emotional regulation, if you're looking at restricted repetitive behaviors. So they really break it up nicely and show you kind of which strategies the research has been done in these areas to show that these strategies can be effective with individuals with autism for these specific things. And then they even go and break it up by age. So you can see that the age ranges, you can see which strategies kind of have been shown to be effective with which age ranges of individuals. And the hard part is whenever you get to the adult ages, because there has been so little research done on strategies working with individuals with adults with autism, that you don't get a whole lot of strategies there. But I think since this came out, I think people are really starting to see where the holes are, and they'll be able to fill in the research in those areas. So I'm sure that there will be more strategies added in the future. And then they even broke it out into which strategies the research shows work with individuals that are classified with autism, or classified with Asperger's syndrome, or classified with PDD-NOS. So it gives you a real nice specific breakout as to which strategies have been shown to be effective in which areas. Now, this is an example. One of the strategies that are proven effective by the National Standards Project is naturalistic teaching. And so you can see here kind of what they looked at. They looked at 32 different studies. They looked at really setting a clear definition of what is involved in naturalistic teaching strategies. And then they give different kinds of examples like incidental teaching. And so they do this for kind of each area. But what we're going to look at today is how do we take, if our strategy that we're wanting to use is not listed on this list of what is effective strategies for individuals with autism, because we're looking at making visual rules for to be able to teach our kids what are the expectations, because sometimes whenever we're teaching expectations for particular areas, our guys may need a visual representation of that, or a visual reminder to be able to keep with them or to have in the environment, so that they will really be able to understand what those expectations are. And so if we're wanting to use a strategy like a visual rule, there's nothing, specific that says visual rules are an evidence-based practice in autism. You can see on the National Standards Project, there's nothing that says this is an effective strategy for individuals with autism. But what it does say is it gives us strategies for teaching that are effective. So it says that naturalistic teaching strategies are effective strategies for working with individuals with autism. So we can use our visual rule, and we can break it out and use a strategy like incidental teaching to be able to teach the individual we're working with to use this visual rule. So with incidental teaching, basically we're teaching as the situation is occurring. We're amplifying the environment, so we're explaining what's happening. We're coaching them along the way. We're praising them. We're doing this, and whenever we're teaching new skills, we're teaching them expectations in a particular area. We're teaching generalization. So for example, if we're working with, if we're trying to teach the person that we're working with how to respond or show empathy to a peer. So if we're playing out on the playground, and the little guy that we're working with is running along, and he kind of bumps into another kid and knocks them down. So we could use that moment as a teaching moment, and we could have our, if we knew it was something we wanted to work on, we could have a visual rule with us, kind of showing us what we should do. And so we could really take him and say, and amplify that situation and say, oh my goodness, I think that Johnny might be hurt. He might have fallen down, and he might be hurt. So let's go over and see if Johnny's okay. And so that we could take the visual out, and we could, and it could be a visual showing, ask our friend if they're okay. And we could show it to them, and we could say, Johnny, are you okay? And then refer back to the individual we're working with, and get them involved in the situation. So we're coaching them through. We're saying, we're getting them involved so that they can ask Johnny if he's okay. So we're teaching them, instead of just bumping into somebody and running off and not really noticing, we're teaching them to go back and to recognize that the person might be hurt, to ask the person if they're okay, to show empathy, to see if there's anything they can do for the person, help them up. And we can use visual rules to be able to do this, but we can do it in the construct of using an incidental teaching approach to be able to do it. And so incidental teaching is considered an effective practice according to the National Standards Project. So we're going to use our strategy in a way that is known to be effective. Now, in the National Standards Project, they also have emerging practices. And so in these emerging practices, they look at maybe some practices that don't have as much research behind them as the practices that are established, but it's really looking promising. They may have fewer published studies. They may only have on the studies that they have, maybe single case studies. They may not quite meet the criteria to be able to say that these are established, but it shows that they are emerging and that there is more research that needs to be done in these areas, but that these practices could possibly become established practices in the future. So back to the 2005 study that we had that showed promising practices. We had a few of these in 2005. We had play-oriented strategies, picture exchange communication, incidental teaching was on the list there, structured teaching. So all of these were on the list back in 2005. Now, according to the National Standards Project, we have a much more detailed list. We know a lot more about which treatments are emerging. And so you can see the augmentative and alternative communication, cognitive behavioral intervention packages, exercise, imitation-based instruction, initiation training, language training, music therapy is on there, picture exchange communication, scripting, social skills packages, structured teaching. All of these things are on the emerging treatments. And so this gives us a much broader list to look at than was previously on the list. And then also unestablished and ineffective and harmful are listed. And I'm not going to go into these, but there are some strategies on there that are listed as unestablished or ineffective. And unestablished is it may be because there's not enough research. It may be because there is research and it's proven that it is not effective, that it doesn't have any effect. So these could be based on a variety of different scenarios, but we're not going to go into those today, but you can look at the list if you want to read the National Standards Project yourself. So what we're looking at today with our visual rules is that, so we talked about how we're going to use them. So we're going to use them in a way that's going to make it where we are using evidence-based practice along with our particular strategy that we would like to use to teach a specific skill. So visual rules are basically based off of based off of PBS protocol. So we're teaching the individuals we're working with what we do want them to do. So we can, with visual rules, we might say, what we don't want them to do, but we're always going to end with what we do want them to do. And then sometimes with some individuals, we might not even want to tell them what we don't want them to do. We might just want to say what we do want them to do. But here are some examples of visual rules. One might be, the first one up here is, this little boy's funny, don't pick, but what do we want you to do instead? We want you to use a tissue. And this one down here was designed for adults to go in a work environment. So, no negative talk about students to other staff or in front of students. Think confidentiality and student dignity. So that's just a little visual rule for us grown-ups. Just a reminder. So here's another example, and this is the template that you have online that you can print out. No pushing. What do I want you to do instead? I want you to say, please leave me alone. No pinching. What do I want you to do instead? I want you to say, excuse me, I need to tell you something. And you can even put your visual rules, post them in the environment. These were made for hallway rules. So we're going to instead say, do not touch, but what do I want you to do instead? Put your hands in your pockets. So if you have a little guy who may be walking down the hallway in elementary school and there's all kinds of interesting things to touch and grab on the walls, this could be something you could even post in the hallway and say, do not touch, put your hands in your pocket. So, going back to what we said before, visual rules are not specifically listed as an evidence-based practice. So, we need to break it down and look at what components of it are evidence-based. So, we know that visual rules teach behavioral expectations, which is part of positive behavioral supports, the Tier 1, which Tier 1 of that pyramid, the very base of it is we have to teach what we want, what we expect, what we want our kids to do. And so we are teaching it in a way that utilizes the strengths of the individuals that we were working with, and that is their visual strengths. So that is so our visual rules that we're using are a part of a positive behavioral supports. And positive behavioral supports are an effective practice, an evidence-based practice. Now we are using incidental teaching to be able to teach the individuals we're working with to use the visual supports, the visual rules. So with incidental teaching, it is also an evidence-based practice. So we know that that component of it is evidence-based. And then, like with all our strategies, we talked about how before we implement a strategy, we want to make sure that we collect our baseline data. So if, like on this example, we're saying no running, and if you turn it over, it says walk. So we would collect our baseline data for 10 days to see how many times the person that we're working with is running in the hallway. And then once we start our intervention and we start using the visual rule with them and teaching it with incidental teaching, then we want to collect our intervention data. So we want to see if if what we're doing is working with decreasing the running and teaching them instead that we want them to walk in the hallway. And so whenever we collect our data, we're going to use that data, we're going to look back at it and see if what we're doing is working. Then we want to keep working at that. We may want to get to a point where if it's been working for a long period of time, we may want to start fading some of those prompts like we talked about in previous sessions. If it's not working, we might want to say, okay, well, this strategy is not working. What do we need to do instead? And so using the data that we're collecting to make these decisions is database decision making, and that is a part of response to intervention, or RTI, which is also an evidence-based practice. So all of these components of all of these components that we are using with our support, with what we're teaching, are all evidence-based practices. So we want to make sure that whenever we do use the support, that we know that there is evidence behind it saying that this is something that has been shown to be effective, it is something that's not going to be harmful, and it's something that we has worked with a lot of individuals with autism. So what we're going to do today is we are going to make our own visual rules. And so the first thing we have to do whenever we're making our visual rules is we have to determine which behaviors we're going to target. And these behaviors that we're going to target, they have to be measurable and they have to be observable. And we're going to look at why this is important. If we're looking at behavior and we say, well, Johnny just plays in the hall all the time, what does that really mean? Does it mean that Johnny sits down on the floor and takes out a ball and starts rolling the ball around? Does it mean that Johnny runs up and down the hallway? Does it mean that Johnny giggles and laughs and goes into people's classrooms that he's not supposed to? Does it mean that he pulls the papers off, the artwork off the wall? Does it mean that he goes and talks to other students whenever he's not supposed to? What does it mean whenever you say he plays in the hallway? So we have to really think specifically and say, what can we, if anybody looked at this, what would they be able to see it? Would they be able to measure this? So instead of saying he plays in the hall, we could say he touches the wall decorations. That would be something very specific. Anybody would be able to look at that and say, oh, he's touching the wall decorations. I know what that means. They would be able to count that and say, how many times did he touch the wall decorations in this trip from our classroom to the cafeteria? We could also say he talks loudly and he gets out of line. So all of these make it more clear for people to be able to see and to measure. And then we want to look at, after we get them to get the behaviors measurable and observable, we want to restate them positively. So what do we want them to do instead? So instead of, he touches the, instead of saying, don't touch the wall decorations, we want to teach Johnny to put his hands in his pockets whenever he's walking in the hallway. Instead of saying, don't get out of line, we want to teach him to walk on the right side of the hallway behind the person in front of him. Instead of saying, don't talk so loud, we want to teach him to use a number one voice. Like if we're using a 5-point scale and we're teaching them that one voice is no sound at all the way up to a number 5 voice is outside on the playground, screaming voice, and everything in between. So then what we want to do is, now that we really understand how to define the behavior, we want to look at figuring out what expectations we have in particular areas. So this is what is called a behavioral matrix. And this is something that is part of the positive behavioral support, trying to identify what are our expectations so that we know what we want to teach kids to do. Instead of telling them all the time, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. Well, what should I do? So we're going to really identify what are the expectations. And so what we look at across the top in the matrix is we look at different areas. So this is classroom, hallway, restroom, playground, lunchroom. So different areas have different expectations. We know that we know as adults that whenever we're at work, there are one set of expectations. When we're at home, there's another set of expectations. Maybe if we go out to a football game, there's that set of expectations of what our behavior would look like. So we know that different environments have different expectations, and so we want to make it very clear as to what those are. And then down the side, part of a school-wide PBS protocol is setting these kind of broad behavioral goals. And so for our purpose today, you don't really have to do this. If your school or your child's school already has some of these set and you want to use them, then go right ahead. They're usually something along the lines of be responsible, be respectful, be safe. Or if you would like to put native tribal values in these areas, those also are wonderful to incorporate. But for our purpose today, you really don't need to put anything into this column. So here's one for home. So we've said, okay, we're going to identify the bathroom, the dining table, the backyard, bedtime, and the car. So what are our expectations? So in the bathroom, our expectations are you're going to wash your hands after using the restroom. You're going to flush the toilet after you're finished using it. And you're going to clean the water off the floor after you take a bath. So those 3 big expectations. At the dining room table, we want to make sure that you try 1 bite of each food, that you keep your chair legs on the ground, and that you put your dishes in the dishwasher whenever you're finished. In the backyard, we want to make sure that you ask an adult before going outside, take turns on the swing, and stay inside the fence. Bedtime, go to bed by 9 o'clock, stay quiet so others can sleep, get out of bed only to go to the bathroom. And then in the car, we want to keep your seatbelt buckled, talk with a number 2 voice, stay seated while the car is moving. So these are the expectations that were identified for this home. You don't have to keep the same areas if you want to use different areas, and you don't have to keep the same expectations. But try to identify 3 expectations for each area that you've identified, and so you can print a behavior. If you should have a matrix that you have printed off from our site, a blank one, and we're going to go ahead and work on you making your own matrix so that we can you can identify what your expectations are and decide which visual rules you're going to make. So across the top of the matrix, you'll have 20 minutes to do this, but across the top of the matrix, go ahead and list the areas of the environment that you would like to focus on. Optional, you can choose 3 to 4 main behavioral objectives or tribal values to put down the left-hand side, but you do not have to do this. And then go ahead and identify behavioral concerns in each area. Then rephrase these concerns into the measurable, observable, positive way that we talked about before. So state what you do want to see the person do. And then write these expectations in your matrix. So go ahead and come up with like 1 to 4 expectations for each area, and we're gonna take 20 minutes for you to get your matrix together and do this. If you're watching this via self-study and not live, then go ahead and press pause on your video while you get this done. So now that you have your matrix, we're going to go ahead and take the expectations that you have identified, and we want to find some pictures or symbols or objects that represent these, just like we have been for all of our other visual strategies courses. If you need a refresher on how to get these pictures, then go ahead and go back to session 1, where we went over how to use a digital camera to get pictures, how to use Google Images to get pictures, how to use actual objects, and then there's also a tutorial on how to use Boardmaker to get pictures or icons if you have Boardmaker software. So we want you to go ahead and get your picture or your picture representations. Or you can always, if you can always use words if the person you're working with is able to just look at the words to determine what the expectation is. And another optional thing is that some people really like to put the non-example, or the thing that you don't want them to see do. It's that you don't want to see the person do. So make sure that if you're going to put this, that you know the person well enough to determine if they will understand that this is what you don't want them to do. And then you're going to get a picture of to represent what you don't want them to do, and then add the universal sign for no, or an X over the picture to communicate no. Then you're going to choose the size that you would like for each of your pictures, somewhere between 2 to 4 inches, based on what the person you're working with needs, and then resize all of your pictures to match this. Then you're going to print your pictures, your icons. You can print them onto regular printer paper. You can use cardstock. You can print them in black and white or in color. You may want to print them, if you don't have color ink, you may want to print them in black and white and then use markers to color some in. So whatever you have access to and whatever you'd like to use to be able to print them out. So we're going to go ahead and give you 30 minutes to be able to get your pictures and get them all printed out for your visual rules. And you can do as many or as few as you would like at this time. So go ahead and follow these steps to get your pictures and your icons. Now that you have your pictures printed out, we want you to go ahead and cut your pictures out. If you made pictures of the example and the non-example, then glue the 2 pictures back to back. Then you'll laminate them using a laminator or either contact paper or clear packaging tape, whatever it is that you have that you can use to kind of make it a little more sturdy. Because it'll be hanging around your neck, you'll probably want to be able to wipe it down so it doesn't get really dirty. But you can use any of these things to be able to do it. Or you can also use a Ziploc bag and just stick it inside a Ziploc bag. And then you're going to punch a hole in the top left-hand corner of each picture or set of pictures, and then attach these pictures to your lanyard directly, or you can put them on a binder ring first so that they're easier to remove. And we're going to show you this in a video, show you how we put ours together. But you will have about 20 minutes to put yours together.
Now that you have your pictures printed, I printed mine onto cardstock. If you don't have cardstock, it's fine. You can do like we did before, print on regular paper and mount it onto cardboard, old cereal boxes, anything that will make it a little sturdier, or you can just keep it on paper. I used photographs mixed with symbols on mine, so my visual rules are no pinching, and I gave the non-example, and then the example is, say, excuse me, I need to tell you something. So that's what we want our little guy to instead. Here's the other one, no pushing. Say, please leave me alone. So I'm going to cut out my pictures and cut out all 4 of them. And then I'm going to put them together to be able to put on my lanyard. So, the first thing we can do is cut them all the way out. And you can see mine are a little bit bigger because this would be visual rules for a younger child. So I have them pretty large. I like to sometimes use pictures of the child themselves because sometimes it helps to gain their attention if they see themselves on the visual that you're using. But I'm cutting them all the way out. And yours can be any size that you choose. If you're working with an older person or a person that doesn't need as large of pictures, then you can make them as small as you would like, whatever they can successfully use and what will be functional for them. So, almost done cutting mine out. And now that you get them, whenever you have them cut out, we're going to take our glue stick. And so you want to match your example with your non-example. And we're going to turn it over and glue the back. And then attach the 2 together. We're going to do the same thing on all of our other pictures that we made, all of our other visual rules that we made, so that one side gives the non-example, and then the other side you can flip it over and give the example. Now, you also have the option of just doing the example and not doing the non-example. So if you chose to do it that way, then you don't need to do any gluing. You can just run your pictures through the laminator just like they are. So now that we have glued all of our pictures together, our examples and our non-examples in the back, then we are going to laminate them. So I am going to use a laminator, but you can use clear contact paper. You can use packing tape. You can just about anything just to make them a little more durable. Especially since these are going to be on a lanyard around your neck. You want them to be as durable as possible. So now that we have laminated them, we're going to cut them out. A little bit of laminating film around the edges just so that it doesn't peel off. And this make and take, I think, is the first one we've ever done. We're not going to use any Velcro. So we're going to take the pictures that we have and go to the top left-hand corner, take our hole punch, and we're going to punch a hole in that top left-hand corner. have a set of visual rules that you can wear around your neck, and you'll have it easily accessible wherever you go, so that whenever you are trying to teach something, whenever you find a teachable moment on the fly, then you don't have to worry about not having your visuals with you. So go ahead and take 20 minutes to finish making your lanyard.
So now that you're done with making your lanyard, if you have any questions, if you're watching this live, then we have our teleconference line open as always, and you're welcome to call that number. If you are watching this via self-study, since this is our last session, then you are always welcome to contact us at the Alaska Autism Resource Center and ask any questions. We'd be happy to answer them for you. Thank you so much for joining us for this visual strategy session. And remember that you can always complete the previous projects online as a self-study. We have done 10 projects total, and all of these are available from our website. You can get all of the information for the projects. You can get all of the materials. You can get the videos to be able to follow along. All of it can be done from our website via self-study. And remember that our materials kits are still available and they're free from our Resource Center. So email us if you would like to request that one be mailed to you. And thank you so much for joining us. And if you have any feedback for this course or have any ideas of things you would like to see added, then feel free to contact us at the Alaska Autism Resource Center. We would love to hear from you and love to hear if this was helpful to you. We would love for you to upload pictures of your final projects so that we can post them for everyone to share and be able to get ideas from each other. And let us know if any of this was helpful to you and if there are things that we can do to improve this for the future. Thank you.